Imagine you're driving a car down the highway,
Right.
and your right foot is just slammed completely down on the gas pedal.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sounds terrifying already.
Right, it is. But at the exact same time, your left foot is pumping the brakes as hard as it can, like simultaneously.
Oh, man. That is a recipe for a breakdown.
Exactly. You can hear the engine just absolutely roaring. You can smell the burning rubber from the tires, but the car itself is just, well, it's lurching forward unpredictably, or it's totally stalling out.
Yeah, lots of smoke, lots of friction.
That screeching, smoking, just overwhelming friction. That is exactly what is happening inside the brain of a student when autism and ADHD collide.
It really is. It's an exhausting way to exist.
It has to be. And that's why today we are bringing you a custom-tailored deep dive, specifically designed to decode this really complex, highly misunderstood neurological overlap.
Right.
Because it is showing up in classrooms everywhere.
Yeah, we are looking at the realities of the dual diagnosis student today. And crucially, we are, moving beyond just identifying the problem.
Right. We actually need solutions.
Exactly. We're going to explore how systemic, tech-enabled solutions are finally stepping up to help these kids navigate a world that, honestly, was not built for them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to do this right, we are pulling from two specific sources today.
Yeah, we've got some great material for this one.
We really do. First, we have excerpts from a foundational text called The Dual Lens of Autism and ADHD in Schools. And second, we're looking at some incredibly revealing operational data from MentalSpace School.
Which is a K-12 mental health support system operating right now in Georgia, right?
Yep, down in Georgia.
Yeah.
So our mission for you today is to figure out what happens when these two conditions overlap, why it is so difficult for educators and parents to spot, and how a massive systemic shift is actually making a difference.
And the sources, they make it clear from the very beginning that supporting a child with both conditions often feels like, well, like supporting two entirely different children at once.
Two kids in one body.
Yeah, because the traits inherent to autism and the traits inherent to ADHD are frequently pulling the nervous system in completely opposite directions. You're dealing with forces that seemingly contradict each other on a fundamental level.
When you look at the day-to-day reality for the child, you just immediately see that friction. Let's look at the specific overlaps mentioned in the research.
Okay, yeah, let's break those down.
So on one hand, you have the autistic trait of this intense, laser-like focus on a beloved interest, right?
Right, the hyperfocus.
Exactly. But right next to it, living in the exact same brain, you have the ADHD trait of scattered, impulsive attention to literally absolutely everything else in the room.
Which is so confusing for an outsider to watch.
It is. I mean, you hear stories about a student who can spend, I don't know, 4 uninterrupted hours building a mathematically perfect Lego structure.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Total concentration.
But then they cannot maintain focus for 3 minutes to write down their homework assignment.
It is a profound disconnect for the child. And, it goes beyond just focus, too.
How so?
Well, you have this deep autistic need for routine and predictability. The brain wants to know exactly what is going to happen, when it is going to happen, and who is going to be there.
Right. That creates a feeling of safety.
Exactly. But that need bumps right up against an ADHD nervous system that has a restless, kind of insatiable hunger for novelty and new experiences.
Oh, wow. So they want the routine, but they're bored by the routine.
Exactly. The child is craving a roller coaster ride while simultaneously being terrified of surprises.
That sounds absolutely exhausting. And physically, I mean, it manifests in ways that are hard for an outsider to grasp, right?
Oh, totally.
Because the text notes the clash between sensory sensitivities, where, buzzing fluorescent light or a scratchy tag feels like literal physical pain.
Yeah, it's not just annoying to them, it hurts.
Right, it hurts. And that is paired with this high-octane ADHD energy and a constant need for physical movement.
And then you add the social difficulties to that mix.
Oh, right, the social aspect.
Yeah, because a child might struggle to read subtle social cues or understand the unspoken rules of turn-taking. And that is layered over the ADHD impulsivity of blurting out answers, interrupting people, or just being entirely unable to wait their turn.
So they might not understand the rule, but even if they do, they can't stop themselves from breaking it anyway.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism. Understanding the why behind this paradox is absolutely crucial.
Because otherwise it just looks like they're acting out, right?
Yes, exactly. To an untrained observer, this just looks like erratic, random, or even defiant behavior. but it is not random at all.
No, not at all.
What you are witnessing are two entirely distinct neurological profiles operating simultaneously within a single nervous system. The brain is receiving conflicting marching orders.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we think about that brain like an orchestra, it is essentially a chaotic symphony.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah. So the autistic side is this incredibly strict, rigid conductor. He is demanding a perfect, predictable tempo. Every note must be played exactly as written on the sheet music because, like you said, that feels safe.
Right, follow the rules, stay safe.
But the ADHD side, that is a group of renegade musicians in the back row who just want to play unpredictable, free-form jazz.
And taking that symphony analogy further, the conductor represents the brain's amygdala demanding safety and regulation through sameness.
Okay, the amygdala is the conductor.
Right, and the
Yeah.
jazz musicians represent the prefrontal cortex, which is fundamentally starved for dopamine. It's seeking out any stimulation it can find just to wake itself up.
Oh, wow. So the child is literally caught in the crossfire of their own neurobiology.
They really are. They want the dopamine of the jazz, but the unpredictability of it terrifies the conductor.
The resulting noise has to be overwhelming. But, if that internal conflict, the strict symphony versus the freeform jazz, is so loud, how is it that these kids slip under the radar for so long?
That's the tragic part, honestly.
Because what the child experiences internally is clearly not what the parents and teachers are seeing outwardly, right?
No, not at all. That discrepancy is caused by the masking effect. One neurological profile can actively mask or hide, the other as a survival mechanism.
Wait, so the brain just hides one half of itself?
Basically, yeah. For instance, a child's autistic desire to follow the classroom rules and avoid disrupting the routine might temporarily suppress their ADHD impulsivity. They force themselves to sit still.
Just white-knuckling it through the day.
Exactly. Or on the flip side, their ADHD need to socially engage and seek out novelty might mask their autistic social fatigue.
But keeping that mask up takes a massive amount of energy.
A huge amount. And they usually crash when they get home.
Yeah, the source text points out the tragic reality here. Because of this intense masking, these students are frequently underidentified, they do not fit neatly into the classic autism box, and they do not fit neatly into the ADHD box.
No, they straddle both.
So instead of a diagnosis, they get slapped with highly inaccurate, damaging labels. Teachers and parents call them inconsistent. Or worse, they say the child is simply not trying.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
Right, like, if he can focus on his video games for 3 hours, he could focus on this math worksheet if he actually tried.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize how the human brain and, by extension, our educational systems naturally tries to categorize things.
We love a good box to put things in.
We really do. We rely on simple boxes and diagnostic checklists to make sense of a complex world. If a child has ADHD, the system expects them to look and act a certain way.
Bouncing off the walls usually.
You're right. That's the stereotype. And if a child is autistic, the system expects a different set of behaviors. When educators and parents are presented with a dual diagnosis that constantly contradicts itself, their standard diagnostic mental models completely fail.
I have to push back here on behalf of our listener, though.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's be real about the environment we are talking about. You have a teacher with 30 kids in a classroom, or a parent who is running on 3 hours of sleep and just trying to get dinner on the table.
Yeah, people are stretched incredibly thin.
Exactly. So how is an overwhelmed teacher or parent actually supposed to differentiate between a child who is genuinely not, like maybe they're just bored or acting out, and a child who is simply paralyzed by these competing neurological needs?
It's a great question.
Because in the heat of the moment, it seems impossible to tell the difference.
The short answer is you often cannot tell the difference just by looking at an isolated moment of behavior. The paralysis of executive dysfunction looks exactly like willful defiance to the naked eye.
So they look like they're just refusing to work.
Exactly. When we talk about executive dysfunction, we are talking about the brain's management system completely going offline. The child is sitting there staring at the paper, doing nothing.
Because the conductor and the jazz musicians are fighting.
Right. They want to do the task, but they are fighting so loudly, they literally cannot initiate the motor sequence to pick up the pencil.
Which is incredibly frustrating for the teacher who just sees a blank worksheet.
Totally understandable. The differentiation comes from tracking patterns over time and changing the environmental variables.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if a child is genuinely not trying, Offering a highly motivating reward or removing a distraction usually fixes the problem.
Like, do this and you get extra recess.
Yeah, exactly. But if a child is neurologically paralyzed by the gas and brakes effect, a reward will not help. The motivation is already there, but the bridge to action is out.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. And understanding that distinction requires specialized clinical insight, which is why hunches and assumptions in the classroom just are not enough.
The sources are very clear that navigating this requires a formal diagnosis from licensed clinicians.
Absolutely.
But once we have that diagnosis, we need to look at the actual roadmap to support. The text outlines a multidisciplinary approach, but it is not just a list of therapies.
No, it's highly integrated.
Right. It is about how these interventions specifically untangle the paradox we've been talking about.
Exactly. The roadmap for care has to be highly individualized and evidence-based. For example, the text highlights behavioral and skills-based therapy.
And just to clarify, this isn't about punishing bad behavior, right?
Not at all. It is about explicitly teaching the child how their own executive function works, giving them actual tools to bridge the gap between wanting to do a task and actually starting it.
Okay, got it. Then you have sensory and occupational therapy strategies. And this is vital because occupational therapy is not just about playing on swings or squeezing stress points.
Okay, it's way deeper than that.
It is about regulating the nervous system. A targeted movement break gives the ADHD brain the dopamine hit it is starving for, which in turn actually calms the autistic brain's anxiety.
Yes, you are using the body to soothe the mind.
That's amazing.
You also need social and emotional support to deal with the inevitable burnout that comes from the masking effect we discussed earlier.
Because they're exhausted.
Exactly. And there has to be parent coaching because the family needs a playbook for how to de-escalate meltdowns at home.
Right, the parents need support too.
Definitely. And critically, all of this has to be formalized in the school through an IEP, an individualized education program, or a 504 plan.
Okay, so getting it in writing.
Yeah, an IEP is essentially a legally binding document that outlines exactly how the school must accommodate the child's specific neurological profile.
This raises an important question, though. How do you implement all of that simultaneously?
It's a huge challenge.
Because effective support here cannot just treat one side of the diagnosis. If a teacher only provides strict, unchanging routines to soothe the autistic traits, they will completely understimulate and frustrate the ADHD traits.
Right, the jazz musicians will revolt.
Exactly. But if they only provide high stimulation novelty for the ADHD, they will immediately trigger autistic sensory overwhelm. The care plan has to delicately hold space for both the need for structure and the need for stimulation.
It is a massive balancing act.
So what does this all mean? To me, it means we have to look at these specific interventions like a custom-tailored suit.
Ooh, another analogy. I love it.
I can't help myself, but really, our educational system is largely built like an off-the-rack department store. It's designed to be one size fits all.
Sit down, be quiet, do the work.
Right. You sit at the desk, you listen to the lecture, you fill out the worksheet. But an off-the-rack approach will never, ever fit a child with this dual profile. You have to take precise, individual measurements.
Yeah, the standard sizing just won't work.
No. You have to tailor the sleeve to accommodate the ADHD need for movement, and you have to tailor the collar to protect the autistic need for sensory safety.
You are meticulously adjusting the seams of the educational environment to fit the exact contradictory contours of their neurology.
But here's the thing. If custom suits are this expensive, this time-consuming, and require a master tailor, how on earth is a historically underfunded, overwhelmed school district actually supposed to make this work?
That is the big sticking point.
Because it is one thing to outline clinical best practices in a research paper, but it is entirely another to deliver that care to thousands of students.
That is the multi-million-dollar question facing state education budgets right now. The logistics of delivering multidisciplinary care inside a public school building are staggeringly complex.
This is exactly why we need to look at the second part of our source material.
Yes, the Georgia data.
Right. We have a working, real-world model to examine. MentalSpace School, currently operating in Georgia. This is how you transition from theoretical clinical advice to scalable application.
And their approach is really quite brilliant.
It is. MentalSpace School is a K-12 mental health support system designed specifically to integrate into Georgia schools. And the way they bypass the usual bottlenecks is fascinating.
Because the traditional bottleneck for getting a child this kind of specialized care is awful. It involves a parent taking time off work, pulling the child out of school, driving across town, and sitting in a waiting room.
Losing a whole day of wages,
And exactly. And all for a 45-minute session that disrupts the very routine the autistic side of the child desperately needs. MentalSpace bypasses that entirely by providing same-day teletherapy right there in the school.
That is huge. And crucially, they don't just use a random rotating pool of doctors logging onto a screen. They assign dedicated therapist teams to specific schools.
Which is so important for these kids.
Yes, that continuity of care is vital. For a neurodivergent student who requires predictability, seeing the same face, building actual trust over time, is half the battle.
Their scope of services is vast, too, which speaks to the multidisciplinary need we discussed.
What else do they cover?
They handle crisis intervention and suicide prevention, which are critical safety nets. But they also cover staff wellness, providing support for those overwhelmed teachers trying to manage 30 kids.
Oh, that's amazing. Teachers need that so badly.
They really do. And family counseling, too, to help build that home playbook we talked about earlier.
But let's talk about the biggest barrier to our custom-tailored suit analogy, the cost.
Oh, always the cost.
Financial accessibility is usually where these grand educational models just fall apart entirely. The data from MentalSpace, however, shows a brilliant workaround. For students on Medicaid, the cost to the family is $0. Zero.
That is life-changing for those families.
It really is. And for everyone else, they have built the back-end infrastructure to process almost every major commercial insurance out there. Blue Cross, Cigna, Aetna, Humana, you name it.
They essentially dropped a fully functioning, financially accessible clinic right into the school.
Yes. All while keeping student medical data totally private and compliant under federal HIPAA and FERPA laws.
The outcomes they're reporting from this model really demand attention. You aren't just reading theories anymore, you're looking at operational data.
And the numbers are wild.
They are. They report an 89% improved attendance rate for students using the service.
89%. Getting kids who are overwhelmed by their own neurology to actually show up and stay in the building is a massive victory.
And a 92% reduction in anxiety, plus an 85% family satisfaction rate.
Wow.
When you analyze the mechanism behind these outcomes, it makes perfect sense. A 92% reduction in anxiety for students, many of whom are likely wrestling with the exact times. Autism and ADHD overlaps we've been discussing proves that when you remove the logistical nightmare of scheduling, transportation, and out-of-pocket costs, you directly and profoundly impact a student's ability to succeed.
You are just removing the friction.
Exactly. You get rid of the friction.
I have to ask about the operational reality from the school's perspective, though. The sources mention that MentalSpace schools specifically provide support for the upcoming HB 268 compliance deadline in July 2026.
Yes, that deadline is causing a lot of stress for administrators.
For those listening who aren't steeped in Georgia education policy, HB 268 is part of a growing national trend where state legislatures are terrified of the youth mental health crisis, so they pass strict mandates requiring schools to provide comprehensive mental health safety nets.
Which is a good thing, theoretically.
Theoretically, yes, but they often don't provide the infrastructure to actually do it. So with that 2026 deadline looming is a plug-and-play teletherapy system with dedicated teams, basically the ultimate hack for school districts that are currently drowning in these complexities.
I mean, hack might imply it's a cheap shortcut, but conceptually, yes, it is an infrastructure bypass.
How so?
School districts are experts in education, not hospital administration. Building an internal clinic with licensed, diverse, culturally competent therapists who can bill Medicaid and 10 different commercial insurances, all while maintaining strict federal privacy compliance that takes years and millions of dollars to build from scratch.
And they don't have years or millions of dollars.
Exactly. By integrating a specialized external model like MentalSpace School, districts can immediately deploy those custom tailors into their buildings without having to learn how to build the textile factory themselves.
That makes total sense. They outsource the medical logistics so they can actually focus on the teaching.
Exactly.
For anyone listening who wants to look into the specifics of that model or dive into their data, the sources list their contact as mentalspaceschool.com, or you can email them at mentalspaceschool@chidrighttherapy.com. It is a really fascinating blueprint for how technology and policy can actually alleviate human suffering in the classroom.
It really bridges the massive gap between understanding a complex neurological paradox and actually having the tools to do something about it on a systemic level.
So to bring this all together for you listening, we have gone on quite a journey today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started deep inside the turbulent internal paradox of a child, balancing the strict safety-seeking routines of autism with the wild, dopamine-hungry novelty-seeking of ADHD.
The symphony and the jazz.
Exactly. We looked at the exhausting reality of the masking effect and how easily these kids are misunderstood and mislabeled by a system that just wants them to fit into a simple box.
And we followed that thread all the way to the scalable, tech-enabled solutions that are rolling out in Georgia schools today. Solutions designed to bypass the geographical and financial bottlenecks, catching these complex students before they fall through the cracks of executive dysfunction.
It's a heavy topic, and the friction these kids face is very real. But there is so much hope in the systems being built to support them.
There really is.
But before we wrap up today, let's leave you with one final, completely new idea to mull over. Something that builds on everything we've talked about, but looks at it from a totally different angle.
Up until now, we have talked about this dual diagnosis as a friction to be managed, right? We spend so much time and resources trying to accommodate or fix the contradiction between a child's autistic need for routine and their ADHD hunger for novelty. We view it as a puzzle to be solved, a deficit to be managed with therapies, IEPs, and custom suits. We just want to quiet down the noise of that chaotic symphony.
Right, we just want the car to drive normally.
What if we shifted the paradigm entirely?
I'm listening.
If we understand that this dual diagnosis creates an intense, entirely unique cognitive rhythm, could educators eventually design entirely new dynamic classroom frameworks that actually harness this rhythm as a superpower?
Oh,
Imagine a learning environment where the intense, hyper-focused, bottom-up processing of autism is actually fueled by the rapid-fire, lateral, out-of-the-box thinking of ADHD. What if the contradiction itself isn't a deficit to be managed, but an asset to be unleashed?
I love that. What if, instead of constantly trying to untangle the wires, we realize they're actually building a much more powerful engine? It makes you wonder, if we stop worrying about the car having one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, maybe we will realize that this kid isn't trying to drive a car at all. Maybe they're trying to launch a rocket ship, and we just need to stop giving them driving lessons and start giving them the right launch pad.
Now that is something to think about.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.